Good morning, or good noon, as it is. My name's Denise Hill, and I am the Head of Engagement at Visit Scotland. And along with my colleague Chris Greenwood, who's our Insights Manager at Visit Scotland, we're delighted today to be meeting with you to talk on the topic of planning, and in particular on the subject of scenario planning as a tool to help businesses to plan out their next steps and to help work their way out through the other side of the challenges we're currently facing with the COVID pandemic. Many of you will be familiar with VisitScotland.org. That's our hub website for industry, where we share a whole lot of resources for tourism businesses on there. And at this time, of course, it's including data and insights relating to the COVID pandemic and its impact on global tourism and on our key markets, but also in particular on the Scottish industry as well. It has presentations up there, webinars that have been pre-recorded, topics like who will be the first visitors to return after COVID, and some sharing of best practice examples, for example, as well. The scenario planning toolkit that we're going to talk about and to showcase a little bit of today is another one of those resources that we have posted up onto VisitScotland.org. We published that up there back in November time, back end of last year, as a resource specifically to try and support businesses, and it's available there for everyone to use. The genesis of the toolkit, well, really it came about as part of a discussion with STERG, with the STERG group, the Scottish Tourism Emergency Response Group, who've come together as a whole lot of agencies and sector representatives to help to plan through COVID. They were keen to do some work on scenario planning, and they turned to Chris and his team to do some work on this. And Chris won't mind me saying that the first iteration of this was a higher level, quite an academic, more of an academic piece, I should say, and that was what was needed at that point. But we looked at it together and thought, you know what, this is something that we need to take and adapt now and make it a real tool that can be used by individual businesses, and so we set about doing that. And one of the things we wanted to do in making that adaptation was to make sure that we got some support, some input from industry as well, and we turned to various sector representatives to have a look at this and have their input before we published it up there. And it was at that point that Jeanette Wilson was really helpful in pulling together a group of people from your sector who would help us to road test it, or at least have a look at it. We were keen to do it with a group first, to work through the exercises, gather in their thoughts, their ideas that were spurred by this, and then use that information so that we could pull together today's session and be able to share those thoughts and ideas specifically for your sector to a much wider audience. Looking back over the last 10 months, there's been a great deal of work done by the BH&HPA and other representatives to inputting into the work of STERG and into other discussions around what the needs of the sector are, what guidance and support is needed. Today's conversation is about turning the focus forwards to the future, and it's very much about looking at the next 3 months, 9 months, 12 months, planning in a time when we cannot at all be sure yet of what the various scenarios will be that we will face, and without doubt that is incredibly difficult, but it is critical to emerging through restart and into recovery for this industry. I'll say up front, we don't have all of the answers, but what we do have is that we've worked with this group, a group of your peers, to gather together their thoughts on what they might need to do in certain scenarios, their ideas on the back of using these scenario planning tools. Their ideas may not map onto your situation exactly, but we do hope that nonetheless what we share with you today will be a really useful starter for 10 in terms of helping businesses to take the toolkit and start working through it for themselves. We have allowed some time for questions and contributions as well. That will come up after Chris Greenwood has done his part of the presentation, but I would just flag at the top of the screen there is a questions option on the screen. So if anybody has any questions or any contributions they'd like to make as we're working our way through this, please use that questions button and let us know. So just before I hand over to Chris and let him walk you through the exercise, I'd like first just to hand over to Elspeth Sutton, who is chair of the Scottish branch of the BH&HPA, who have been so helpful in pulling together the pre-work and the preambles that we have needed for this session. To see if Elspeth would like to say a word or two. Elspeth.
Thank you, Denise. Good morning, everybody. I just want to say British Holiday and Home Parks Association Scotland is thrilled to have this opportunity to work alongside Visit Scotland to provide this webinar, which has been specifically tailored for park owners and operators through a collaboration of 3 member parks and Visit Scotland. I'm sure that the park owners and operators will find this information we're about to hear to be of interest to them and greatly assist in planning a way ahead for their individual businesses throughout these very difficult times. I hope you all enjoy it, and I will now pass you over to Chris Greenwood of Visit Scotland, who will talk us through the process.
Great, thank you very much. Firstly, as is usually customary in these, it is a fantastic honour to be able to present this work to you. The workshops that we've been doing with the holiday park, camping, caravanning sector, along with the other sectors, has been, exceptionally valuable for us at Visit Scotland to understand that the issues and challenges that are present within the sectors, so that we can feed those through, as said, to people like the Scottish Tourism Emergency Response Group, STERG, but also to other departments, to assist with our understanding of how marketing, digital content, strategy, policy, these issues can all work together. So the workshops and the work we've done around this has had much more of a broader impact than just directly. But we hope that what we present here today is going to be valuable to you as individual businesses, park owners, and stakeholders, so that you can take this information, work with the toolkits that we've developed, and hopefully develop some agility, some flexibility, into your planning process, because certainly, in what is possibly one of the most overused words in this current time, this period of uncertainty. Now, just to provide some background, what we've got is we went through a scenario planning exercise. Now, what scenario planning is, it's a process of understanding a system or maybe a business or a sector, and trying to work out how do you define what the key impacts are on that system or sector, and how will those key factors, based on an identified list of assumptions and uncertainties being applied to those, come up with a range of possible kind of, well, futures, scenarios, snapshots if you want, so that when you're developing plans and strategies, you can test those strategies against the possible futures, and from there, of course, you can then determine whether you need to change or adapt your strategy or your plans accordingly. So what it does is it's very good when you've got limited forecasting or projection data, which we currently have at the moment. Some of you may be aware of things like the Office of National Statistics International Passenger Survey, which is the measure of international visitors, the volume and value, but also our domestic monitors, UK residents. We don't have data for 2020 and the start of 2021 from those surveys, so we don't have the volume and value data that we would normally rely on to allow us to do forecasts and projections. And because we don't have those, it's very difficult to predict what will be the volume of visitors, where are they likely to come from. So a lot of organizations are using scenario planning to fill that gap in their kind of strategy developments. Now, there are other scenario planning exercises that are taking place. The one that we did for STERG is one that takes us from July of 2020, which was the reopening of tourism in Scotland, and really will take us through possibly around about an 18-month period. And the idea was it was to cover the period from the release of the first lockdown, but take us all the way through to really where tourism is back up and running in some format in a continuous way. So that's why we're saying maybe in like an 18-month period. And the assumptions and uncertainties take into account things like the rollout of vaccines, the limitations on markets, localized lockdowns, national lockdowns, those kinds of things. Other scenario planning exercises that have been taking place include ones that the Scottish Tourism Alliance led on, and it was an industry-based one that takes us up to 2025. So they've got a bit of a longer sort of time frame, and their scenarios are really about the re-establishing and recovery of tourism once it's up and running and going, and how does it get back to the levels it was at kind of pre-pandemic. And then there's a Scottish Government, Scottish Enterprise-led scenario planning exercise, which is much more at a kind of higher economic recovery policy level, which takes us up to 2030. And that is one where tourism, heritage and culture are one sector amongst many sectors, including food and drink and the financial services sector and things like that. So, there are multiple exercises, but the one we were looking at was very much focused on the tourism sector, and it's covering the point from lockdown to, really the re-establishment of tourism in some format. So just to clarify, scenarios, they are a series of snapshots. It is a tool for being able to test your strategies to make sure that they're still valid, and whether you need to change your strategy or your objective or your goals, determine, based on what the strategy is. What a scenario isn't is an aspiration to achieve a specific future or scenario plan, because the idea is that you're meant to prepare for every eventuality, and we think that the 5 scenarios that we developed would cover those situations. So, as I said, scenarios don't predict the future, but they do help us decide how to prepare for a whole series of different futures. So the scenarios that we developed for STERG were based on the 2 variables, and the 2 variables that we thought were most dominant in determining tourism, the tourism system, the tourism sector at this particular point in time. This period, if we want to call this intra kind of COVID, intra coronavirus period, were whether the consumer is confident or insecure, but you could also translate that to the consumer is able to travel or not able to travel on a scale. And if you think about it, Consumers can be locked down either in a national lockdown, or it could be a regionalized lockdown. It could be that some people are shielding and therefore don't want to travel, and so it affects different markets. And we've also got the issue of international markets and domestic markets and things like that. So you've got whether consumers are confident or not confident, and that's, or whether they travel or not travel. On the other side of that is you've got whether businesses can trade or not. And again, you could have a situation like we have at the moment where businesses aren't able to trade or open because of a lockdown, or they can be fully open as it was kind of, sort of 2019 and before. Businesses are open, there's no restrictions. But there could be a midpoint where businesses can open, but there are restrictions, like regulations around physical distancing, maximum capacity within a property, which may be lower than the maximum capacity that you would normally have, historically. So there's that factor as well, whether a business can be open or whether it is restricted in its ability to trade. So when we ran the workshops, we concentrated on 2 of the 5 scenarios, and that was partly for time purposes, so that we could sort of get through the workshop in a suitable amount of time. But also the 2 scenarios that we selected were the 2 that we felt were most relevant to the situation right now. So the first scenario that we looked at is the one that we call the baseline scenario. And the baseline scenario is the world as it is, as it was when lockdown ended in July 2020. So you had this phased reopening. Businesses had to follow regulations about, sort of like cleansing regimes, physical distancing, maximum capacity. So there was operating, but it was operating within, sort of rules and regulations that could affect business operating environments, and it also affected consumer behavior. Markets were affected, so very much focused on the domestic market as we were in the summer of 2020. So, and we think that the baseline scenario is going to be the model that we see when we come out of this particular lockdown as well, a phased reopening, and there'll be rules and regulations that the businesses will have to follow. Even though there's the vaccine rollout that's going on at the moment, but that could affect possibly the confidence within certain markets. So markets that were maybe apprehensive about traveling may be more confident about traveling this time around. The other scenario that we looked at was the 5 winters senorio, and it's actually the name has become quite ironic, because when we were discussing this with groups in the Cairngorms, they were saying that their winter season, the snow in the Cairngorms at the moment is some of the best that they've seen for years and years, and it's some of the prime best ski weather that they've had. But the 5 winter scenario was named because it's meant to represent 3 to 5 quarters of a low season performance. So think of it in those terms. Now, if you can imagine, we kind of had a low season performance in Q4 of 2020, and we're going to have, a low season performance in Q1 of 2021. What if that rolls into Q2 and Q3 and Q4 of this year? That you've got very restrictive operating conditions. Now, we selected this scenario as the other scenario to use in the workshops, because we felt that was what represented what we're in right now. Everybody's locked down. What is it that businesses are going to do right now to be able to adapt and change and react to what they're experiencing right at this very moment? We did have 3 other scenarios, and very briefly I'll go through those. Scenario 2 was what we referred to as the old normal. And essentially that was tourism pre-pandemic, 2019 and before, back to the old ways. And we need to think, do we want to go back to how things were, sort of pre-2020, or do we want to, as many organisations and commentators have said, do we want to build back better? Do we want to think about building back a sustainable and responsible tourism sector and respond back to things like how do we react to attitudes towards maybe over tourism or pressure on the environment, things like that. So, you know, but scenario 2 was really looking at that kind of pre-pandemic tourism. Scenario 3 was one we call like doors open, and this was one that is synonymous or represents possibly Highland tourism businesses or businesses within the borders, and it was one where businesses are allowed to operate, but there is a restriction on consumer travel. So if you think of the tiered system and the lockdown that took place within the Central Belt, you know, you had Highland businesses that were open, able to trade, possibly not eligible for support because there was no restrictions on them trading, but their market, which would be coming from places like Edinburgh and Glasgow, weren't able to leave their local authority area. So how do they, you know, how do you access those markets and the challenge that face? Scenario 4 was the one that we called the long chill. All right, and this is one where you've got built up, pent up demand amongst the consumer, but businesses are really restricted in what they're able to do. So we thought that was representative of things like city-based tourism. You know, so you've got possibly visitors that are apprehensive of being in cities because they think, you know, their preference is to be more rural, open air, you know, wider spaces, not wanting to be, you know, in a city. So, you know, what does a business do in that particular situation? And, you know, possibly it's more relevant towards, you know, the hotels and hospitality sector, but, you know, you also we have our urban holiday parks that may have seen some experience of that. So when we did the workshops, we followed a process, and what we did was we looked at we looked at what is the factors that are impacting like the holiday park sector, the camping and caravanning sector. And we started off with a SWOT analysis. So we looked at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that are related to the sector at this particular point in time. So from there, we can then look at the implications that those have on specific businesses. And the implications that we specifically looked at was the implications on customers, product, suppliers, and staff. So knowing what the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are, we then could apply it to those. And then we finished off by taking all of that information, and we had an exercise where we looked at what are the things that the sector needs to continue to do now and within the scenario, the baseline scenario. What possibly needs to be ramped up in light of the two scenarios. And then finally, we discussed some of the big ideas, you know, the innovation and aspirations that are within the sector as well, that could be maybe applied in this particular area. So what I've done is I've taken all the information, and there was a wealth of information that we had, and I've kind of summarized those into some key bullet points. Now, as I said, but what I'm going to be showing is a summary of those, and there was much more information. And I think Denise mentioned at the start, we're going to be taking all this information and we're going to be producing some sort of appendices, if you want, to the workshop, to the scenario toolkit, which is on VisitScotland.org, and we're going to have specific sector information where you can take the toolkit and the holiday park kind of appendices, if you want, and use that information, which can have much more kind of explanation around the SWOT to be able to apply that to your planning. So what did the SWOT bring out? Well, some of this you will probably be familiar with. Hopefully there's some things in here that may be new to you. So under the strengths and weaknesses, we saw that, you know, because this applies to internally within the sector, the strengths are, it's the loyalty of your customers. There is a wide number of caravan owners, there are a wide number of people who enjoy camping, and, you know, whilst they will be loyal to specific sites, they're loyal to the sector and they enjoy touring, they enjoy their caravan. So one of the key strengths is the loyalty of the customers that you've got. I think that's representative in the clubs that are associated, you know, the Caravan Club and so on. There's a diverse product range. There are small operators, large operators, there is niche operators within the glamping sector, and there's a wide geographical spread. There are urban holiday parks and there are rural and island holiday parks. There are large corporates and there are very small kind of owner-operator businesses as well. So there is kind of something for everybody within that. And I think the other key strength that came out quite clearly within the exercise was it's the reputation of the sector for being clean, sustainable, environmental. It's healthy, outdoors, and friendly as well. It's good for families. It's good for a wide range of sort of demographic groups as well. It attracts domestic and international. The reputation of the sector is very, very strong throughout the markets. In terms of weaknesses, the digital infrastructure was one that came through, and it was felt that sometimes the lack of digital infrastructure might put off certain markets in coming. As a lot of people sort of rely on mobile signals and sort of broadband Wi-Fi, things like that, to be able to plan what to do, where to go, and things like that. So that came through. The other thing that came through was it was referred to as a prominence towards a mature demographic as part of the kind of regulars. But I think it was also another way of looking at it is it's how to attract new demographics and new markets into the system. And what is the longevity of those new markets? So, at the moment, we've got almost a captive domestic market, but within that are people who would normally go on international holidays, who will possibly be looking to holiday parks, but they'll also be looking for a very specific experience that maybe relates to what they would expect abroad. And therefore, how does the market react to that, and how much investment you put in that might not sort of pay off in the long term, but would be, sort of favourable in the short term. And then there's capacity management. So as we're expecting higher demand within the camping and caravanning holiday park sector, there is a situation where you get in situ pitches. People who put their mobile caravan on a site for the entire summer, but maybe only use it a few times every month at weekends. So you've got a site that's obviously being paid for, but you're getting inquiries in, but you don't necessarily have the capacity to be able to take those because you've got these in situ campers. So that was highlighted. There was also talk around the possibility of declining requirements of camping pitches as well, and how that will come in, maybe preference towards other sort of products and things like that. In terms of opportunities and threats, the opportunities are obviously there is that captive market, there is the growing staycation trend. There's opportunities through technology adoption, and we've got a case study coming up of where there's the role of online booking and the use of mobile apps and things like that that's really enhanced a specific business. Something that came through quite regularly within conversations was the role of the growth of motorhome ownership and motorhome hirers, and how holiday parks could collaborate with motorhome hirers, and how that would bridge the gap in some of, shall we say, knowledge and etiquette of motorhome use, particularly amongst kind of new users of that particular product. And then I think there's the opportunity of sort of being a local business and being part of the community and reinforcing local experiences, and the role that the holiday park or the camping and caravanning site has in bringing people in to recover the wider sort of tourism offering within the area, because it came through the interconnectivity of tourism businesses. Can the holiday park provide a good offering if the attractions aren't open, and therefore the attractions need to know that there are customers coming into the holiday park and vice versa. In terms of threats, there was, as I said, investing in new markets, providing them with products that you might not get the long-term return on, because they could return to going to foreign holidays. So how do you interpret that? It was clear that there was a role of legislation, and how there is differences in legislation for Scotland and the rest of the UK. and how legislation might prevent innovation and adaptation to you know, the parks. And then uncoordinated reopening. So, you know, if restaurants aren't allowed to open or attractions aren't opening for whatever reason, what does that do to the holiday park and the offering that they have? And can you fill the gap by creating new product? So we took the SWOT, and I've summarized it again here. And what we did was I've taken the other exercises and we've combined them into this sort of matrix. So, you know, if we look at the strengths and opportunities and the opportunities and weaknesses, can we maximize opportunities and minimize weaknesses through, you know, like strengths and opportunities, and minimize the weaknesses and threats in the same way? So the outcome that we had from that was to capitalize on the strengths, maximizing opportunities and minimizing the threats, was certainly the role that social media has. For many of you, you've got the opportunity to use your social media channels to provide inspirational content to people who is building up demand. And we know there is a trend at the moment for people that the planning process for the holidays is a very therapeutic thing for them. So having inspirational content from things like holiday parks, you know, sort of like blogs and pictures and things like that, is really sort of helping people, because it's almost as though the holiday planning process is becoming like a hobby. We talk about the armchair visitors. So, you know, you're positioning your product at this particular point where people can't travel to when they're ready to travel. A lot of talk around the strength of working with local suppliers, provide authentic products. So, you know, if you've got local food producers, you know, that adds to the overall experience of the people there. But we also had a lot of talk around opportunities to work as, you know, being, you know, with local supermarkets, so that you can have like a click and deliver location. You know, people will be able to order food and have it from the supermarket and have it delivered to the site itself, especially if maybe your own retail function is closed at the moment. That might be an excellent service for people. But also there was the possibility for people with kind of lodges and holiday homes to maybe have a semi-serviced accommodation. So, you know, working with restaurants who possibly aren't able to take visitors in, but will be able to deliver restaurant quality takeaway food. And you can provide that as premiumization, which would obviously be sharing revenue from your guests to the survival of businesses in the wider area. So we've got that. We know a lot of people have taken on sort of dogs at the moment, and we know that many of you are very dog friendly, but certainly being able to capitalize on what's referred to as the hound pound, you know, promote the fact that you're dog friendly and that there are dog walks and you know, you've got those facilities, would certainly be attractive to many people at the moment. And of course, you know, there's the possibility of innovation within this area as well, and that could be through volunteering options. You know, can you get people to maybe contribute to rewilding within your wider area? We know about the Bellamy scheme that many of you are participating in, and that is you know, something that, you know, people will feel as though they're giving back to businesses, especially as people are increasingly aware during the lockdown of the role of the environment. You know, seeing more wildlife, possibly seeing that the air quality and the environment is improved with us all being locked down. But there's also the possibility of providing sort of skills. So, you know, you could think about providing maybe camping courses, helping people understand the etiquette of camping, you know, and you know, the equipment they have. And the same would go for maybe like motorhomes. Maybe you could run courses for people. I know that many of you commented about people hiring motorhomes and turning up and just not having the right kit, or, you know, understanding about how to set up for the night and what you have to do and prepare because they've hired a motorhome. And not really know how to use that. So, you know, there's plenty of opportunities for paid or sort of promotional kind of courses and activities that would maybe pay dividends as time goes on. In terms of the other side of that, we've also got, you know, definitely try and get kind of online bookable, which I know many of you are, but certainly people are increasingly want to engage directly with the tourism business rather than go through intermediaries, and that's because they want information about what is open, you know, what is the cancellation kind of strategy, and things like that. There's also engagement with the local tourism sector, so that, you know, if you want to demonstrate that the attraction sector is open, telling the attraction sector that you're going to have guests and things in may influence them in what they are. Certainly the promotion of green and wellness messaging is going to be central, because that is what people are wanting: fitness and exercise. They want to be out in open spaces, fresh air, and obviously all the things that are going on. But it's also the promotion of, you know, like having that family-friendly reputation as well, and sort of making sure that all the different demographic groups are supported. And I think one of the things that certainly came through is that the holiday park allows, you know, possibly at this time, shall we say, disparate family groups be able to come together, and whilst they can't all stay together, they can stay on a holiday park and sort of reconnect physically when they've been distant in a safe outdoor kind of experience. And obviously that'll be subject to whatever the regulations are at that particular point in time. If we look at limiting the weaknesses, of course, it's all about good communication with your customers, keeping them sort of warm, informing them, making sure that your website is up to date. And certainly of the websites that I've been sort of looking at and seeing, many of you are doing that already, you know, and highlighting when you can potentially start taking bookings again. Certainly to be able to manage that potential big increase in bookings that we would be expecting when people know they can take that domestic holiday. You know, having your sort of health and hygiene notices up to date, you know, the good to go scheme, having that prominent on your website as well is obviously a very good demonstrator to customers that you are following those, even though we all know that you will be anyway. But also, you know, there's the possibility of looking at sort of revenue management, you know, being able to control the number of guests and things that are coming in through pricing, but also to be able to maybe fill short-term gaps. And if you're having maybe different sort of turnover times, you know, that you'll be able to promote those by seeing when the peaks and troughs of activity are going to be coming in, and being able to target specific markets, specific times. Certainly families are going to be more prevalent during school holidays. You know, an obvious question, something you already know, but can you augment that by looking at maybe younger demographics, like couples that are looking for outdoor activity exercises, you know, the mountain bikers, the walkers, those kinds of things, and being able to tailor messaging and product towards them. And there was something else that came through about developing premium pitches. One person said that small investment of adding, you know, individual water taps and electric hookups to maybe hard pitch camping sites was a small investment, but was allowed to increase the price charged for those services. So, you know, small things, small investments might be able to add up to providing premiumization within the sector. Other things that we kind of looked at is, you know, making sure that you know, engage with the local community and sensitivity about reopening, making sure that your messages are clear and people know what's going on within the local area, maybe engaging with the local DMO as well in that area. There was something that came through quite clearly about building a relationship with local authority, and there was something about, you know, people like environmental health. You know, they've got reduced capacity at the moment because many people are possibly working from home, or they've got reduced staffing. And when you reopen and possibly need environmental health to come out to be able to provide certification for, say, for Legionella certification, those kinds of things. You may find that there is insufficient officers and tradespeople, if you need, say, electrical testing, to be able to come out, because the demand would suddenly increase. So make sure you build relationships with suppliers to see if there's going to be any blockages should everybody start to try and reopen at the same time, and make sure that you're aware that that might not be a barrier to you able to reopen. So those were the kinds of things that were discussed there, which was really kind of forward thinking and planning. So some of the examples of how that has been kind of applied within Scotland, 2 examples that we came out with was Argyll Holidays, and they were identified last year as sort of an example of firstly having front and center a policy for customers, their safer stay promise, which highlighted the lengths they were going to ensure the safety of their visitors, but also the rollout of the mobile app that they had, which allowed contactless check-in, but also provided kind of content, like menus, online reservations, booking for facilities, those kinds of things. And that was an example of how they kind of adopted technology and communication to be able to respond to the situation that they found themselves in, and it paid dividends in terms of high occupancy rates and booking. The other example was Wood Leisure, and you can see the website banner they got there, the book with total confidence, again, like expressing that message of safety and security, but also the imagery that was showing, kind of the open air, rural, which is really chiming with visitors. Certainly over last year, what was coming through was people wanted, open space, rural experiences, and we can have like outdoor experiences within urban areas, within parks and holiday parks, these green spaces, but that's what people wanted. They didn't want to feel enclosed. They wanted a kind of control over their situation and environment. Anyway, to kind of sum up, what is our expectation for reopening? Well, what we're looking at is an expectation that we're going to have a tiered or staggered recovery. So when the notification for reopening comes through, and we don't know whether that will be post-Easter, May bank holiday, or wait till we need to see what the announcement is based on the scientific evidence, but certainly the notification that schools are reopening shows that that there is a roadmap beginning to develop. We expect the start is going to be hyper local, so this is going to be people within your own kind of local authority area, then followed by maybe the Scottish domestic market, then rest of UK, and then international at some point in the future. And of course that could be varied dependent on sort of various changes. We may see some sort of international tourists maybe coming in sooner than air travel. Things could change, but that's the kind of idea that we're going to have. So, are you prepared for the hyper-local and Scottish domestic market? We see that the strengths and opportunities are around being agile, adaptable. There's the familiarity of the sector, which I think is key, and also that demonstration of quality that you have as a sector as well. And the weaknesses and threats can be minimized through your own confidence, innovation, and flexibility. How can you adapt to these new markets that would normally go abroad, and how does that affect your existing markets that may may not appreciate the new markets that are coming in? If you've got people that want a more lively experience, but you've got an existing customer base that wants a more sedate experience, how do you balance those off? And of course, we know that the sector is stronger in collaboration. So, work with your DMO, local community, and other tourism operators, because as a key kind of asset within an area for a volume of visitors, you can spread the spend within yourself and more broadly to support, the hospitality sector, attractions and activity providers. And of course, it's all about communicating with your customers, suppliers, also with your staff as well, because many of them may have situations where they could be looking after dependents or homeschooling or things like this, and therefore that might affect your ability to reopen. But also those staff will be looking for reassurance that they can return to work, you know, when they're able to. And as I said, you know, contact your trade body, get in touch with the BH&HPA, who have got a lot of knowledge and experience around the legislation. And if they know the issues that you're facing, that legislation is preventing you from maybe being able to innovate and adapt, they can look at those and see how to engage with, you know, the authorities, but also with the DMO as well, in terms of, you know, opportunities that you might have, you know, in terms of initiatives that you could tap into. So we know the holiday park sector is going to be one of those sectors that, you know, will possibly see a lot of demand as we recover, certainly if we've got a captive domestic market. So, you know, it's really sort of looking at how you're going to react to that in terms of, you know, dealing with the range of types of visitor you want and the product that you want to offer as well. So ultimately, how will you plan, prepare, and position to respond to the future? That's everything from me. I will hand back to Denise. I think we've got some time for questions.
Hi. Hi, everybody. Thanks very much, Chris, for that. That's great. That's absolutely super. We have set aside some time for questions just now. If anybody has any thoughts or questions they'd like to pose. We've had one question in about responsible dog owners, and perhaps we should expand that a little further into, you know, responsible users as well. And Chris, any thoughts on how does one make sure that we get responsible visitors coming to the parks and responsible dog owners? Any thoughts on that one?
Well, I've noticed that within the holiday park sector, there are a number of suppliers, providers, and also more broadly, both at a destination level, but you have visitor charters. So, you know, you can incorporate into that people, as you outline your sustainability policy. You know, we don't want people going out, you know, into the broader, maybe wooded areas on the periphery of the park and lighting fires or littering, you know, and we can also have, you know, the policy for dog ownership. I also appreciate there are many parks that, you know, don't necessarily want to attract dogs, especially if they've got things like the holiday homes. You know, for variety of purposes. It could be because you've got maybe a policy around allergy and things like that, or, you know, sort of cleaning and things. But again, if it's clear that dogs aren't welcome, having that messaging is important. But I would certainly say having sort of clear communication as to what is expected. You'd hope that the regular customers would know, you know, like just generally Caravan owners have a known kind of park etiquette, but certainly for the newbies, I think was the term that was used in the workshops, they're the ones that possibly need greater clarification as to what would be acceptable and what wouldn't be. And it extends out just from the dog ownership, but also providing those facilities, you know, dog walking areas and you know, poop bags and all those other kind of things. You know, those could be added value products that would enhance your dog credentials, your hound credentials.
I think that's right. When we did the workshop, there was quite a lot of conversation around this, and I remember taking away from it the idea of would I personally, as a new visitor, know the rules? Would I feel confident about the rules? Because I think, just as you've said there, Chris, there is such a strong loyalty among the visitors to the parks, who will be absolutely au fait with what's right and what's wrong. But what we saw through 2020 was a dramatic increase in Scottish tourism of people who had never holidayed in Scotland before, and whether they were going to the holiday parks or camping or undertaking, you know, any other kind of holiday, there were an awful lot of people abroad in Scotland who were not in the habit of having those holidays. So the idea of, would I personally, you know, understand what the rules are, that was a question I went away with, and that felt like something that it's probably quite easy, I would have thought, Elspeth, to make sure that these rules or these guidelines, that etiquette, as Chris used that lovely word, etiquette, is conveyed. I don't know if you have any ideas or thoughts on best practice where you've seen that done particularly well for these new markets, to explain to them what's expected.
Yeah, definitely, Denise. I think it is a huge and growing market within our industry. I take on board Chris's comments that not everybody wants to be beside dogs or near dogs, but what I would suggest for those parks who are looking to become dog friendly, make sure that you really are dog friendly. Make sure that if you it's not just you're using it as a tagline. Make sure good policy is set out in place. It's sent ahead with your booking confirmation, what expectations are, what facilities you are providing for dogs. And in best practices, I've seen so many superb policies set out that dogs get their own welcome pack, and within that pack there is, you know, I can walk, please let me walk here, here and here, please don't take me here, and make it as if the dog is talking. And whilst it sounds corny, people that have dogs love their dogs and really do appreciate it. Simple things, put a towel in the dog welcome pack, and then you know that they're going to get washed down, hopefully dried down before they jump all over the furniture. Make very clear signage as to where dogs are welcome and where they're not. And one other good thing, which is inexpensive, is provide lots of dog bins for dog waste around the parks, and also free dog poo bags. It doesn't take a lot of money and it makes a huge difference. But I think the overriding principle, what I've heard over the last year or so, is that we are an industry that does welcome dogs very much, but make sure that you're not just you're not just playing at lip service. Think about it. There's so many creative ways that you can use.
Super, thank you. I think we don't have any further questions unless there are any last minute ones that people are furiously typing in. So at this point, I would just then say that I think in terms of summing up, Chris has already done a bit of a summing up there of the strengths and the weaknesses, the opportunities there for the camping and caravanning sector. And I think, as we said earlier, scenario planning, it doesn't predict the future, but it does help us to decide, make decisions on what it is that we need to do now in order to shape that future, which I think is a really important thing to remember in all of this. I hope you feel inspired to go and download the toolkit now. It is something that you could do on your own, or by all means, you know, work with as a team with some other like-minded people, or within your own staff group as well, to work your way through that and to look at what would your response be, perhaps inspired by some of the things that you've heard this morning here, but what would your response be to the potential scenarios that are facing us, and think about, you know, what would that be in the context of your specific business. Chris mentioned earlier on that in terms of next steps, we are going to publish this webinar up on VisitScotland.org. We're going to also share the scenario, sorry, I beg your pardon, the SWOT analysis that we did too, so that when you go onto that section of VisitScotland.org, you'll see not just the toolkit proper, but also what I'm calling the sort of companion pieces. We've done this for self-catering sector, for the wildlife tourism sector, but when you go there, you can download the toolkit, but also use these companion pieces specific to your sector as well. Watch out for other things that are coming up as well, other things that might be helpful to you. They'll be published on .org. There's more research going up there, and there will be more presentations and webinars happening. Chris mentioned earlier on digital readiness, digital skills training as well, and we have a whole programme of digital skills training together with Digital Boost right through the month of March. We've got something, in fact, on the 25th of March, which is all about how to become discoverable and bookable online. So if anybody's interested in that, have a look on the website on VisitScotland.org and sign up perhaps for that as well.